we record yet? And let me share that. Oh, Roger, can you see the
Yeah,
format? Let me get it into
you got it.
PowerPoint. Okay, so it's set and all you see is just one slide, right? At this time? So anyway, we'll start with, so on policies and procedures part 2, we're working on, this one will actually have 3 policies that we're going to work on. There'll be the procurement documents, financial management and accounting, and then the reporting certification. What I did in this area, the other sub-bullets in there are, I consider as kind of procedures to the policy for financial management and accounting. So we'll talk about that. Right now, it appears that my dog is communicating with the next door neighbor's dog. So if you hear that, sorry about that. So we'll go through that. That's going to be our agenda for today. The acronyms for this will be the CFR, and for us, that's a 2 CFR. There's a lot of different CFRs out there, but for grants would be this particular one that we work off of. Each agency will have its own CFR number that goes through it. You may look at documents out there or hear people talk about UGG, which is a Uniform Grants Guidance. That's just the same name as the CFR. And when people talk about that, that's what they're referring to. So if you see that happening and you wonder why UGG, there was just a short version of the 2 CFR Part 200 with that very long name. In here, we're going to use the authorized representatives in some of these policies or procedures. And we'll be talking about PII, which is personal identifiable information that we need to be aware of. And then the CFDA number, which is a catalog of federal domestic assistance. And then for the policies or procedures that we're going to work with, we're using XYZ as the example. Now, as we start with the policy, I want to go back to part 1, and we had described in the policy procedures, we use those 2 things, and we introduced how-to documents at that point. Policy is the overall guidance, should be fairly much short, maybe 1 paragraph, which talks about what the policy is, the parameters of that. The procedures would then be a little bit more detailed, but even there, we'd like to see that the procedures just kind of completes the circle of the procedure for that policy, but not in great detail. And then the third thing that we do is then we use the how-to documents. The how-to documents are the ones that are very detailed in that direction. So you may see in a procedure, it will have X, Y, Z, such and such, and then as part of the procedure, whatever that is, and then you may see a parentheses like see how-to document. And how-to documents can either be forms, can be Excel, could be even a chart, decision chart, the flow chart that might happen in that direction. But those are the things that would be kind of on a everyday basis. And the reason I like to see how-to documents is how-to documents can change quite often because staffing changes or realignments, other things like that. And working through a how-to document, that's an internal document, that's a living document, and you don't have to take it back up for approval, review and approval. For policies and procedures, those are still living documents. You should probably look at it at least annually, but they're at kind of a broader level. Those, as you review them and you make changes in them, then you will need to have it reviewed by management Management will then have legal look at it at the same time and give their take on it. If there's something that's not quite right or circumvents the law, that's why you have legal reviewing that part. And then it finally goes up to the board for board approval. That's why I like the idea of how-tos. You can do those very minute stuff without having to take it all the way through when the policies and procedures are adequate to cover yourself on the process. So now, as you see over here, we're talking about procurement. And with procurement, what I did was I added the citation. So for procurement, has it from 200.317 through 0.326. Those are all the citations that make up the procurement. And it's fairly detailed in the process. What we want to do with the policy is say that, we comply with those guidelines and everything. So by the federal law, general procurement standards, that's how broad you want to make it. In this case, what we did also is thinking about how broad does that want to be? Well, this also includes contract performance with terms, conditions, specifications on contracts and purchases. That's kind of the broad area that you want to have your policy set. And then you can go deeper into that. One of the reasons I added this is contract performance is that with the CFR, auditors are now looking at contract performance. What are you doing besides just looking at the invoice and then paying for that kind of service or other things like that? There needs to be a little bit more to that, and we kind of talk about that in the updated 2 CFRs, but we'll keep it right now pretty broad in that situation. Now, our procedure for the procurements are kind of closing the whole process. So you want to make sure that you have something that staff are following the general procurement standards. What are they? There's 5 standards in there by cost threshold. So you kind of set that up so that anybody that's working with procurement know what standard and what part they need to do within those standards for procurement. Some are very detailed, some are not as detailed in that, and we'll be looking at that in our how-to documents. You see the procurement how-to documents. We're going to show the 5 methods and the thresholds for that. And then also at this time, as a procedure to close the procedure for procurements, staff should actually go back and look at the conflict of interest. The conflict of interest primarily is for the board members, but also for anybody that's associated in the procurement of services or contracts in that situation. So you want to make sure that like we talked about in the part 1, conflict of interest, you want to identify if there's a conflict. If there is a conflict, then you note it. And then the part of that would be that, let's say a board member has a conflict of interest because they're a related party to the services you're trying to contract in that situation. And the remedy there would be just that the board member does not vote on those type of procurements. Our procedures now go into our how-to documents. And what we wanted to do is kind of bring out the 2 how-to documents that you could be using. And over here, we have the how-to document. What with the 2 CFR that changed with some of their updates, there's 2 types of procurement. There's the informal type and the formal type. Within that, the informal type has micro purchases and simplified acquisition as their procurement. Simplified acquisition is now the new term that the feds are using for that area. And as you can see, that for the standards on that micro purchase would be $10,000 up to $10,000, or you can have approval for $50,000. How do you get that approval? Most of the time, if you have a single audit and your external auditor says in their statement of question, cost, and findings that you're a low risk auditee, you will, it'll make it much easier for your funder to say, yeah, you're approved to do the micro purchase up to $50,000. With the new changes that we have coming in to this new year, the single audits are going to be at $1 million instead of the $750,000. So a lot of programs are going to be outside of that. You would have to find other ways to get approval from your funding agency or your funder at that point. So that's one thing. I would think that 90% of our people typically have micro purchases than anything else, because that's a $10,000 limit in that sense, or a threshold before you go to the next one. Now, there are some programs that will have things that will be over $10,000, and then you'd go into the simplified acquisition, which in that case, it takes you from 10,000 on up to 250,000. And as you can see in the notes there, that's why it's good to have this kind of how-to. The difference between micro purchase, you don't need a quote. The only thing they truly ask for is that you have equitable distribution. In other words, use different vendors at the same time. I'll be talking about the updates. There's a little bit more updates on the equitable distribution at this point. And that's all you have to do for micro purchase. Pretty simple in that situation. The simplified acquisition is now up to 250,000. So any range from over 10,000 to 250,000. All you need is rate quotes. You don't need to do a cost analysis and price analysis or anything like that. What is a rate quote? Well, you can actually, in this situation, you can look on industry standards for the cost of whatever you're looking for, whether that's electronic equipment, other things like that, depending on the industry. And that's all you need to do in that situation of the rate quote. I still recommend that with the rate quotes, it's good to go ahead and have 3. So you can look those up, and that's all you need to do in that process. And then when you get to the formal, now you get into those kind of issues at $250,000. The construction, the sealed bids are for construction. Not much of us use that. We may use it if it's, let's say you're working on shelters or temporary housing and things like that. Unless you're using grant funds, then even the seal bid, it would be recommended to use a seal bid, but you don't have to if you're not using grant funds to do that at that point. Then the proposal is where some may have that situation. I know TASA does, and some other that are either subrecipients that we give pass-through money to pass it through to other organizations. So our sexual assault from VOCA, we do that. We also have ARP, American Rescue Plan Act dollars that HHSC passed that money through us, and then we are supposed to then do the contracts and the grants for that. That's where a proposal would come up. Most of the proposals will be RFPs, requests for a proposal. You could have different kinds of proposals also at the same time. You could have what we call an RFQ. I've used it before at a state agency where we're looking at requests for qualified quotes. And in that situation, RFQs were the part that was good about that was you didn't have to go with the lowest bid on your proposal. You look at the qualifications of those. And in our situation, we're looking at CPA firms to help us with our subrecipient monitoring. So we wanted to have the qualified CPAs that do that type of work. And it didn't, the price factor not as big of a deal. And then finally, the non-competitive. Typically, you'll see this more in counties, state agencies, other things like that, where it's unique in that situation. Most of the time, part could also be public emergencies. So like when there was the fires that were out there in Bastrop a long time ago, and still now in different places, those agencies may need to procure things quickly to take care of those wildfires or other things like that. It's discouraged to use a non-competitive because it's very specific in that area, but it can be done. Typically, you would not use a non-competitive if you're looking for kind of services or goods, things like that, because in most cases, there isn't one unique vendor for that. You may have somebody that you like, but there's probably other vendors that can do the same thing, and you should then use a proposal in that situation. So this is a nice how-to document to kind of keep in track of when you're going to do procurement. You've got those kind of things. One of the other things, another how-to document, is just for documentation. You can use something like this, a Word document where you're actually using it as your supporting documentation for why you procured something. And in this case, it's pretty simple that you either check the box for micro or procurements or for simplified acquisitions. You very rarely would you see anything else. Then you document what you have, the items. Let's say if you're doing laptops and you put that out there, your procurement methodology in this situation, because of micro purchase, all you'd have to do is just looked at industry ads for laptops and describing the laptop. And that's all you really need in that type of procurement area, where the simplified, you might do a little bit more. And naturally, if you were doing, let's say, a proposal, then your procurement methodology information needs to be really addressed in that situation. That's pretty rare that you're going to have something over 250,000 that you're doing, considering most of our grants are supplemental grants. But if you did, then you would need to put in the different things in there, the methodology, price analysis, sending it out to, let's say, to vendors list, other things like that. And then naturally you just use document it by signing and approve that. So that's a good how-to document. Now we're going to get into the financial management, and that citation is 200.302. I look at financial management as one big process. So I use it as a policy in this situation. And then the other things that we're going to describe, I use it as a procedure, because the procedure fits for the policy. And in this situation, the policy for financial management is that you having a good financial management system that can record on record your awards. So your federal, state awards, things that you would need on your, let's say, QuickBooks, other things like that. When you do that, you're also including your CFDA numbers, your catalog of federal domestic assistance numbers, which is for federal grants. You would have that. The federal award number would be in there. The year of the award itself, the agency, and even a pass-through agency, as you have. That may be in your QuickBooks, or it may be in another kind of how-to document that gives you all that information, so that if you're having a single audit, your auditor will then ask for this kind of information and you've got it readily available. So that's the policy for financial management. Now, how do we get into that? Here's some that are kind of recommended as best practices. And part of that is to have procedures well written on determining allowability of cost. Well, one thing that you do is your how-to document is referred to subpart E, which is cost principles. That shows where you look for allowable cost and also unallowable cost in that situation. So your procedure is to look at those kind of things in your financial management, and then where do you go is kind of your how-to in that situation. And then you just reference it, in your management system the procedure for that. So one of the procedures is records retention. This is asked by most funders in that situation, and it's kind of grouped in two different ways. The federal records, the standard by GCFR is a 3-year and closeout. So if you've had your grant for 3 years and now you're doing your closeout, the date after your closeout would be the time that's clicking in the sense of 3 years after the fact, that you can then go ahead, archive it, do whatever you need to in that situation. State records, that one's kind of sometimes confusing. Some state agencies still say, well, we're using the federal standards, which is a 3-year retainment. But the state itself has a part where the state library has their own standards, and they say anything that has contracts, other things like that, is a 7-year standard. This makes it kind of difficult for organizations because do you do a kind of tier of retainment that for all federal grants, we're using the 3-year, for all state grants, we're using the 7-year, or some organizations say, well, we want to be safe and be very conservative, and any grant will stay for 7 years in that situation. And that's okay too. A lot of times when you start tiering things and with multiple items like that, it's a bigger risk of error, and you could have a find in that situation. So that's why some programs will use a 7 just to encompass everything in there. And if you have a continuation grant, like a lot of the grants are, then it's at the end of each year would be your closeout of that year. And then you need to keep that for 3 years, and that would be by grant year. So in some cases, you may have a grant that you've been having with the governor's office or the OAG that you've had each year, or every 2 years, you may have a new award. Then you would have that part, but the whole grant is still ongoing. Then you just break it up into those kind of pieces in one sense. A lot of times it's by fiscal year. I would recommend that if it's a biennium, a 2-year contract, I would wait till the end of the contract itself or the award before you start the clock for records retention. One of the other things as a procedure is the request for a transfer of records. This primarily is because your funder deems that there's something valuable in there, and they want to keep that those type of records for a long-term situation. It's not that often that it happens, but it's good to have a procedure on that. So they would communicate with you, and part of your procedure is that you communicate the terms and conditions for the retention of those specific information that they're requesting for, and that's that part. And then I would identify the records to meet those specific requirements and memorialize it in a document, either a how-to document or a white paper that this is the reason we kept these documents more than the retention point. And it's typically because your funder needs that information. It may be because there's disputes going on, and they may have a situation where lawsuits may take longer than that part, and they want people to hold the information until they get through with that part. But that's kind of what the request for transfer records are. Now, one of the things you want to do is kind of find a method for collecting all your data. How do you do that? This would be the procedure to do this. Yeah, and when it's practical, that you want to collect the information more on electronic information now than just having the papers and copies and things like that, and kind of describing how you want to do that. The procedures here, then your how-to would be describing how do you want to do that. Is it in the cloud, off-site? Do you have secured location where you may have a hard drive or other things that would be where you save your documents, everything else like that? How do you do that? How do you collect it? And then also, how do you collect that kind of information internally on a day-to-day basis? So you start working with those things, and you just kind of find out what you need to do specifically when you're storing a lot of the information for different reasons, regulations, or grant parts. And then the other part in there, you need to kind of go ahead and how to document. What do you do for your personal identifiable information? Things that like client files that have client information in there. Other things like vendors that have specific social security numbers, things like that. It'd be good to have a how-to document to describe how you do that and how you keep that information so that it's not breached by some sort of hacking. Here you might see this as a lot of times it's in the audit part of either your award or your contract and everything. You should probably have a procedure on the access to records. Most funders want to have access to it for monitoring or subrecipient monitoring. So you'd provide that kind of access to whoever in that is your funder to review those kind of documents. And what do you review at that point in that situation? It could also include the audits and examinations in your access. So that's kind of what we're talking about as a procedure, so that you're not out of compliance when an auditor comes in, or let's say if you have a direct grant from the feds, that the federal auditor comes in and wants this information and you can't find the information. You've got a process to figure out how to capture all that information, and it should be timely. Typically in audits, you'll have the auditors looking at your financial information, but they will like to a lot of times have interviews with your personnel. So here are your procedures to make sure that it's timely for them to have discussions, because sometimes the personnel has better understanding of the documents that they're looking at and working through that. And then again, you just want to exclude any personal identifiable information, primarily for victims. Now, at the same time, you should probably have something that restricts public access in one sense. Now, by federal and state law, nonprofits, even state agencies, others are required to provide information to the public. It's usually done, if it's federal, it's a Federal Freedom of Information Act is what they will cite, and they will need, then you'll need to comply to that. If it's on the state side, it is the State Open Records Act that goes through. One of the things people say, well, who will ask for that? Well, the public will. Sometimes, and I know that when Roger and I were in the state TEA, or when I was with the OHG, you may have people that are looking at a lot of information either for legislatures and everything else, and they want some information. Well, they can ask for it on the Freedom of Information or the state. We've had that situation where you may have somebody that's working on their doctoral program and looking at specific things, that a state might have available, that would be another thing, either through the Texas Open Records Act or through the Freedom of Information. So that's why that's in there. But you could have a individual that will ask to see your financials and everything. You can provide that. You either in one, a lot of people will do it that says, yes, you can see a copy of our information, but we would want you to come in and look at it on site and to send it out. And then you never know where that information goes once that person has it, if they're going to share it with a lot of other people. It's kind of good practice to say, yes, we're available. We're complying with the Open Records Act or the Freedom of Information, but we would like for you to be here in that situation so we could watch those. And again, your PII, you need to just kind of, that's where you start to have those caveats and your restriction of public information so that when people ask for something, that you can redact certain things so that you can protect the people that are either victims or vendors or other things like that. That would be your restriction on the public access. And anytime you do have something like that, I would recommend that you talk to your attorney on kind of compliance issues. You want to make sure that you comply with those acts, but you also want to make sure that you don't hurt your organization either because you're out of compliance and didn't give the right information, or that you may have, given information that could be sensitive to either victims or other people that are involved. So it's always good to just go ahead and have that as part of your procedure to, once you get that request, you start obtaining things, analyzing what you can give, what you can't give, and then discuss with your attorney their legal opinion on what you should provide. So those were the main kind of parts for your financial records and your system in that part. The last part is a policy report certification. This has become very big in the federal government and pass-throughs, the state agencies and everything else. Usually you will see it in the grant award or a notice of award, or in a grant contract, depending on how that works. And what it will say is that anything that you provide, let's say in your application, that you're certifying that everything is accurate and correct. So it'd be good to go ahead and have a policy that you just comply with those type of federal, those certifications for the federal or pass-through entities. That's a good broad statement. Your procedure is then to identify who's your authorized representative, and depending on what certification, you can also have a designee. So let's say for your contract or your application, you may have an authorized representative, but for invoices and other things like that, that authorized representative can provide a designee. Now, a lot of times, like with the OAG and VOCA and others, when you're looking at reimbursement, they may ask you to identify your financial person. Well, that's kind of one of your designees in that situation. And in there, you should have that you comply with everything that you've reviewed, your expenditures are proper, and the terms and conditions are okay on that situation. So you're certifying that what you have signed is accurate and correct. And then you can see a how-to. In this case, the how-to was actually from a federal agency that provided that kind of information and wanted everybody to know that how serious it is when you send in things to the government, especially that particular federal agency. A lot of times it was because of fraud, waste, or abuse, more fraud or in that kind of situation. And there's kind of the part that they had in there as one of the things that this is what you're actually signing. Now, in most cases, most funders don't have it that broad. They may just have a statement in there, or on, let's say, e-grants, that there's the part that whatever you sign, you're certifying that it's accurate and correct. So you would set up a how-to depending on those kind of situations. But the main emphasis is that whoever's signing on those things should realize that there is a process in things so that the funders don't get caught in situations of fraud, embezzlement, other things like that. I've actually been involved in several cases when I was with the Attorney General's office where that certification was used for the fraud, waste, and abuse. You then sue on that kind of situation. Some people actually got jail time. Others got other things in that direction. The board might have been had to do a lot more work on things so that they didn't have that situation happen. But those are kind of things. I know when we did that one time, besides this kind of thing, then the other situation was kind of, you know, working with your documents that you signed off on a governmental document, and that was false at that time, false signing of documents. So those are kind of the main kind of things that you need for your policies and procedures when it comes to federal grants and financial. I would just recommend, again, in the policies, they should be broad, just over-encompassing statements. Procedures should just kind of close the process within that part, but doesn't need to be so detailed at that point, but just from point A to whatever your resolution is, and then use your how-to documents to go ahead and then describe things for your staff so that they can follow kind of either the steps or understand why you're doing those things. Do we have any questions at this time?
Most of them are regarding the copies of this recording or the the presentations. I think you're going to forward them the presentations, right? The ones who didn't get.
Yes.
And then the recording will be available sometime within the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, the recording should be in the next 2 weeks from our IT person. We'll get the recording. He'll put it onto the TASA YouTube channel, then send us the link to it, and then we'll send it out as here's a link that you can use to go. I'm thinking now that probably after we do this, I will then go ahead and send the handouts again today so that when everybody gets another email tomorrow, which is the registration link, that it's not confusing in that situation. We'll have one email just for the handouts. The next email is so that you can secure a spot for the December 2nd cost allocation training that we have. And then typically what we do is that a day or two before the training, we will send out the handouts at that point. So that's kind of the timelines that we have. Again, I would think that it's going to be easily 2 weeks before the recording will be sent out. Just takes time. Any other kind of questions that we have? Well, I appreciate everybody attending. And again, what we'd like to do is that if you have any kind of topics that you would like for us to train on, please send us information. You could either do it right now on the chat, or like I like to do is I like to think about, well, let me think about what I want as a topic. just send me the email. You do have my information here, and that's in the handout. So you can just directly email me that and say, well, we'd like to do something, maybe a topic like matching might be a situation. All kinds of different things that could come up in that area, so that we can think about how we can best help people out. Let me stop share. Here's my record.